Hello, Pahrump, and welcome to another edition of the Independent Doctors of Pahrump. And today I have Dr. Savran. He's in our office today, and he's going to be talking about cardiology and some other specialties here in Pahrump. He's one of the only two left surviving doctors that are independent in the community. And between him and Dr. Reiner, they decided to come up with this program to talk to you and to help you out with different situations about healthcare. And you can call. There's a phone line at 727-8750. You can call that number and talk to Dr. Savran, or you can Facebook that in on Facebook, our local Pahrump, and we'll talk to you about it. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Steven Savran. He is an MD, and tell me a little bit about yourself.
Okay, I'm a cardiologist. I was born and raised in Philadelphia, went to school in Philadelphia, went to Swarthmore College and Jefferson Medical College, did my internship and residency in internal medicine at University of Wisconsin, and did my cardiovascular fellowship when I was in the Air Force, combined program between David Grant USAF Medical Hospital in Fairfield, California, and University of California, Davis. I've been in private practice since in the state of Nevada, first 11 years in Reno and the rest of my time in Las Vegas, spending a lot of time in Pahrump. I'm in Pahrump 2 days a week, and I've been in Pahrump since well before 9/11. There's no connection between those two. What I would like to do today is explain a cardiovascular technique that we do that some of you watching may have had done on you. A lot of you have had the older procedure done, and try to put it into perspective. And what we are talking about is a new way, or at least a new way in the United States, of doing coronary angiography, cardiac catheterization. I'm certain a number of you have had it done from the groin, and the groin is the way I was taught to do it back in the 70s, my gosh. I've probably done 15,000 of them since then from the groin. And in the United States, we are sort of dinosaurs. Everyone else in the world does it from the wrist. It's called transradial. The radial artery is the artery that you take your pulse in the wrist that runs down right next to the thumb. And while we get the same data and we can do all of the same things by going radial as opposed to the femoral artery in the groin, there are a number of substantial differences as far as you, the patient, is concerned, which I would like to show you. And then there's a number of economic advantages too. The patients find transradial much more comfortable, and I'll show you a slide on that. But I'd kind of like to just show you what we do when we're in the cath lab with you all. Part of it is I'd like to dispel some myths about what we do. We don't open up the chest, we don't take out the heart. And it's actually a very comfortable procedure done under local anesthesia. So if we can go to the first slide, what you are looking at here is the right arm. And you can see the hand, and just the red are the arteries, the blue is the heart. And the route to the heart is from the radial artery, which is right next to the thumb, and we drop down into the aorta and right down into the arteries that feed the heart. When we go from the groin, which I don't have here, it would be the lower right-hand side of the screen. We'd be going up the aorta and around the aorta to the heart. So we wind up in the same place. It's just going radially. Patients find it much more comfortable. And the biggest thing is we don't have any complications from a groin stick because we're not in the groin. The next slide shows that anatomy a little bit better. The radial artery, which is on the right, is the artery we go into. There's a second artery that goes to the hand. That's on the fifth finger side, called the ulnar artery. And the two of them connect right below the wrist. And that's important because we can occlude the radial artery about 10–15% of the time. And as long as the ulnar artery is there, it doesn't matter. In fact, the heart surgeons for decades have been actually taking out the radial artery, especially in young people, and using it as a bypass. So while the radial artery is far from a throwaway artery, it's a very nice source of access. And believe it or not, it doesn't hurt to have a radial artery angiogram. The next slide is how we test whether or not there's an ulnar artery. We take our hands, we occlude the radial artery, we occlude the ulnar artery, if you look at our two thumbs, and we have the patient make a fist and let it go a couple times. The middle hand now looks blanched. It looks kind of white. It looks like it's been in the cold for a while. Then we just let go of the ulnar artery, the artery near the fifth finger, and if the hand becomes red again within about 10 heartbeats or about 8 or 10 seconds, then we know we have a good ulnar artery. We know that arch is working, and only about 5% of the time can we not do the test radially. So once we've decided that, and we decide that in the office when we see you, and I've got a bad tendency now of when I see patients in the office, before I tell them anything, I immediately go for their wrists to see whether or not we can do them radial. And they don't quite know what's happening at that point until I explain it. But then once we're ready to go, and the patient comes to the hospital as an outpatient, we usually have the patient walk to the cath lab. There's no reason to have them go in a gurney. There's no reason to have them go in a wheelchair. But they walk into the cath lab, they lay down on the table, and really what we're doing is x-rays. And I'll show you a couple x-rays later on in this talk. But what we're trying to do is take an x-ray of the arteries that feed the heart, and we simply have to get there. So this is the patient. The patient's draped. We have a little thing on the thumb that gives us oxygen saturation called an oximeter, just to be sure that we're getting good blood flow. And you can see the area right above the thumb open for me. And we then give a little bit of Novocaine, and we give maybe 0.2 of a cubic centimeter, which is about a 25th of an ounce of Novocaine right into the skin, right above the artery, and then we stick a needle into the artery. Patients who are very nervous, we give intravenous sedation to. We have a lot of patients that want to drive home after the procedure. We have patients that have things to do that afternoon, and since we send everybody home 3 or 4 hours after the procedure, if they're going to leave that day, if they want to drive home, and a lot of my practice comes from Pahrump, and a number of the patients drive in and drive home the same day, we don't give them intravenous sedation. And we don't, not because of this sedation, but because Department of Motor Vehicles does not allow people to drive after receiving intravenous sedation. I had a patient that I was going to bring here today to tell you about it, who's had angiograms done from both the groin and the arm, both by me. His comment was, when you finished the test, I asked you when you were going to start. And that generally is the response we get from the patients. They don't even know we're doing anything other than the fact that the lights in the cath lab go on and off as we're x-raying. So we then stick the artery, and this is what our table looks like. That yellow catheter that's on the lower right-hand side, we usually don't do unless we're doing a person who has heart failure or we're doing a valve case. That goes into a vein and lets us measure pressures. The orange thing that looks like a little spear in the middle is the tube that we put into the artery. The needle is actually so small we can't show it. It's much smaller than the needle that Quest and LabCorp use when they're drawing blood. So we put the needle into the artery. We take a very flexible wire, put it through the needle, which then lets us track the artery, and that's what's in that little elliptical plastic container that's sitting over the tube. Inside there is the artery, is the wire, I'm sorry. And we then put the wire into the artery, take out the needle, so now we have access to the artery without anything sharp, and we simply stick that tube over the wire and then take out the wire. And now we have a way to get into the artery without sticking anymore, and that's the only discomfort. This artery is very small. It's about the size of that little tube. And because it is small and because it can go into spasm, we put a couple drugs For those of you who have any familiarity, we put verapamil and nitroglycerin into the sheath. They both dilate the blood vessel and keep it from going into spasm. And once that's done, we have our access. And then, if I can go back a couple slides, which means going backwards and not forwards, we simply go up the artery until we get to the arteries that feed the heart. So if you go back and look at the anatomy of the wrist, it's a pretty straight shot. And it actually is not that terribly difficult until we get to the heart. Now, these are the tubes that we use. These are the little plastic tubes that go in. And you can see the tube going into one of the two arteries that feeds the heart. And it actually fits in there pretty well. We get this kind of fit. Takes some manipulation sometimes. The size of these tubes, we use the term French, and French is a size. 3 French equals 1 millimeter. 1 millimeter equals 1/25 of an inch. So we're talking pretty small tubes. These tubes come either 5 French or 6 French, which is either 1/25 or 2/25 of an inch in diameter. And as small as these tubes are, we can manipulate them, we can twist them, we can get them into the artery. Patients don't feel this at all. There's no pain fibers inside the aorta or inside the other blood vessels for touch, and the patient has no idea we're doing this unless we're having some difficulties, and then they can hear me saying some words I probably shouldn't say on television, but I think it helps catheter motion to do that. This is the artery. This is the tube that goes into the left coronary. This is the tube that goes into the right coronary. And in fact, we can do everything with one tube. We're about to go on break, our first break. And what I'd like to do when we come back is show you a couple pictures of what we get when we're in the cath lab. And then I'd like to go into some of the advantages of this economically as well, and I'd love to field some phone calls.
All right, we'll be right back after these messages.